The world, 1.2 million years ago, was locked in the grip of an unforgiving ice age, a time when vast glaciers crawled slowly across continents, reshaping valleys, carving mountains, and swallowing entire forests beneath walls of ice hundreds of meters thick. The air was sharper, colder, and drier than anything modern humans have ever breathed. In the northern latitudes, endless white plains stretched from horizon to horizon, where even in summer the wind carried the sting of frost. Here, life clung to existence with stubborn persistence. Megafauna roamed these lands, towering woolly. Mammoths with their shaggy coats and spiraling tusks, colossal steppe bison grazing in herds, thousands strong, woolly rhinoceroses lumbering through the snow, and saber-toothed cats prowling silently, their massive fangs gleaming in the pale light. Overhead, the sky was often a dull gray, the sun a weak, distant disk that offered little warmth. Yet even in this desolate expanse, life endured. And among the most resourceful survivors were the early hominids, not yet the humans we know today, but beings with strong hands, sharp eyes, and a growing mind capable of problem-solving and innovation. They were shorter and stockier than modern humans, their bodies adapted to conserve heat, their limbs powerful, their skin darkened to protect against the harsh glare of the winter sun reflecting from the snow. They traveled in small, tight-knit bands, rarely numbering more than a few dozen, for the land could not feed large groups. Every step of their survival was a battle against the cold, against hunger, against predators, and against the unpredictable wrath of nature itself. To exist in this world required more than strength. It demanded intelligence, cooperation, and a deep understanding of the land. The ice did not care if they lived or died. It moved slowly, relentlessly, swallowing valleys and pushing rivers from their courses. Where the glaciers ended, tundra stretched for miles, dotted with patches of hardy grass and low shrubs, the only food for the great grazing herds, and thus the lifeline for the hunters who followed them. In the brief summer months, meltwater would carve channels through the ice, filling the air with the sound of rushing streams. Wildflowers would bloom for a few precious weeks, and the land would hum with insect life. But soon enough the frost would return, locking the earth in silence once again. Early hominids learned to read these rhythms. They knew the timing of the herds, the places where ice would crack and reveal fish-rich streams, the hidden hollows, where wind was less fierce, and the caves whose mouths faced away from the worst storms. They did not wander aimlessly. Each movement was part of a cycle, a pattern written into the memory of their people over generations. This knowledge was survival itself. They carried it not in books or maps, but in stories told beside fires, in the lessons passed from elder to child, in the silent example of a skilled hunter stalking a beast across the snow. At night, the world outside was pitch black, except for the shimmering curtains of green and purple light that danced across. The northern sky, the aurora, a mystery they could not explain, but perhaps feared or revered. Within their shelters they huddled close for warmth, wrapped in furs, their fires crackling, their breath rising in pale clouds. Every day brought a decision. Stay and hunt in the known territory until resources ran thin, or move onward into the unknown in search of better ground. Predators followed them as much as they followed prey. The saber-toothed cat was not the only danger. Packs of giant Ice Age wolves, larger and more muscular than any seen today, prowled the edges of their camps. A single mistake, wandering too far from the group, failing to notice a predator's shadow on the snow, could end a life in moments. And yet they endured, not through brute force alone, but through unity. Every member had a role: hunters, foragers, tool makers, fire keepers, guards, teachers. Even the young learned quickly, for the Ice Age did not wait for childhood to pass. A child might be tasked with gathering dry grass for tinder, sharpening bone needles, or watching the horizon for signs of movement. The Ice Age world was harsh, but it was also alive with patterns. The migration of animals, the changing of the seasons, the shifting of the ice itself, and the hominids who survived were those who learned to move in harmony with it. They were not masters of this world. They were its students, shaped by its trials. Every frozen breath, every step across the snow was a lesson, and though they could not know it, these lessons would echo through the ages, laying the foundations for the human story that was yet to come. Fire was not merely a discovery for early hominids. It was a revolution, the fragile spark that transformed survival into possibility. Before fire, the Ice Age nights were merciless. Darkness brought not only the cold that seeped into bones, but also the unseen predators lurking just beyond the reach of vision. With fire, the night was pushed back. A flickering orange glow meant safety, warmth, and light. It was a boundary. Predators hesitated to cross, a circle within which the group could rest without fear of being taken in the dark. But mastering fire was no simple task. In this frozen world, dry wood was scarce, and storms could snuff a flame in seconds. At first, fire was a gift found only by chance, stolen from a lightning-struck tree or gathered from the smoldering remains of a wildfire. These rare flames were precious. Once captured, they were kept alive day and night, tended by careful hands, never allowed to die. A single lapse, a single gust of wind could erase days or even weeks of effort, plunging the group back into darkness. Over time, their skill grew. They learned to choose the driest wood from beneath overhanging rocks or sheltered trees. They discovered that certain stones, when struck together, could send a shower of sparks onto a bed of dry grass. The first, true fire-making was slow, difficult, and uncertain, a matter of patient scraping, blowing, and coaxing. But when it worked, it was a triumph that brought the group together, their faces lit by the dancing flames, their voices rising in what may have been the earliest forms of song. Fire changed everything. It allowed them to cook meat, breaking down tough fibers and killing dangerous parasites. This not only made food safer, but gave their bodies more energy that could be used for hunting, traveling, and thinking. Around the fire, they could work stone into sharper blades, fashion spears, or stitch together hides into warmer clothing. Fire even allowed them to move into colder lands where survival would have been impossible before. On bitter nights, they slept in caves where the flames kept frost from forming on their faces, the warmth seeping into the stone walls themselves. Predators, once fearless in the dark, now paced at a distance, their eyes catching the flicker of light but refusing to cross into its circle. For young members of the band, fire was both a teacher and a guardian. They learned how to feed it, without smothering it, how to shield it from sudden gusts, and how to carry it, embers wrapped in bark or carried in hollowed bones, to new camps. In the Ice Age, fire was more than a tool. It was a living thing, and those who could keep it alive were as vital as the hunters who brought down game. It also became a center for the mind. In its glow, they shared stories of hunts and near escapes, of strange lights in the sky, of ancestors long gone. The warmth loosened tongues, and the shadows it cast on cave walls may have inspired the first art, crude shapes painted or carved to capture the animals and spirits of their world. Fire turned survival into culture, and culture into memory. Without it, early hominids might have been nothing more than another Ice Age species, enduring until the cold claimed them. But with it, they became something else, creatures who could shape their environment, who could look into the flames and see not just survival for tonight, but the promise of tomorrow. And in that promise, the first sparks of humanity began to glow. In the Ice Age, survival was measured in meat and marrow. For early hominids, hunting was not simply a way to feed the body. It was the core of existence, the heartbeat of the group. Every hunt was a gamble, a test of patience, strength, and cunning. The cold lands held life, but that life was fierce and elusive. Herds of mammoth, woolly rhinoceros and giant bison roamed the frozen plains, their massive forms shrouded in steam as their breath met the frigid air. These animals were not prey in the modern sense. They were towers of muscle and bone, capable of crushing a hunter with a single step or sweeping them aside with a horn or tusk. Yet the rewards were immense. Hundreds of pounds of meat, fat for warmth, hides for clothing, and bones for tools. The hunt began long before the first spear was thrown. It began with observation, reading the land like a vast, frozen map. Tracks pressed into the snow told of recent movement, while scat revealed what the herds had eaten and how recently they had passed. The tilt of the wind was crucial. One wrong breeze carrying the human scent could scatter an entire herd beyond reach. Communication was silent, a language of hand signals and glances honed by necessity. There were no words as we know them, but meaning was clear. Wait, move, surround. Hunters moved low, blending into the folds of the land, using ridges, boulders, and brush to hide their approach. The weapons were simple yet deadly: stone-tipped spears, heavy clubs, and sharpened throwing sticks. Each tool had to be crafted with care, often over many days, for the difference between a sharp point and a dull one could mean the difference between life and death. When the moment came, the air grew taut with unspoken tension. The herd was driven toward an ambush point, sometimes a narrow pass between rocks, sometimes the edge of a cliff where a panicked animal might fall to its death. Shouts erupted, spears flew, and the frozen air rang with the cries of both hunter and hunted. Blood steamed in the snow, and the ground trembled beneath stamping hooves. Victory was never certain. Sometimes the prey escaped entirely, leaving the hunters exhausted and empty-handed. Sometimes a hunter did not return, struck down by a tusk, trampled under hooves, or pierced by a horn. But when the kill was made, the camp came alive with the energy of survival. The animal was butchered with practiced efficiency. Fatty organs were eaten first, raw and still warm, to give immediate energy. The hide was stripped and stretched. For clothing, sinew was taken for sewing and binding, and bones were cracked open for the rich marrow inside. Nothing was wasted. In the Ice Age, waste was death. The hunt was also a teacher. The young learned to throw spears by shadowing. The elders, to read the tracks and scents of the land, to understand the rhythm of the seasons. Over time, hunting shaped more than just bodies. It shaped minds. The need to coordinate, to plan, to anticipate an animal's movement required memory, foresight, and cooperation. Around the fire at night, stories of hunts were retold, each retelling embedding lessons for the next generation. The hunt bonded the group, each member tied to the others by the shared risk and shared reward. It was not just a way to eat. It was a way to live. And as the Ice Age dragged on, hunting became more than survival. It became a defining trait of humanity itself, the ability to face the cold, the hunger, and the danger, and to turn them into strength. In those moments when a spear struck true and a mammoth fell, the early hominids were no longer just surviving in the Ice Age, they were mastering it. The Ice Age was not merely cold, it was relentless. The wind cut like a blade, the snow blotted out the horizon, and frost could claim a life in hours. For early hominids, shelter was as vital as food, for the body could endure hunger far longer than it could endure the gnawing freeze. In these frozen lands, the art of creating warmth became an unspoken science, learned over countless generations of trial and error. The most ancient shelters were not built so much as discovered. Caves and rock overhangs offered natural protection, their stone walls breaking the wind and trapping the heat from a fire. Yet caves were not always available. and they carried dangers of their own. Predators might already claim them, and water dripping from above could freeze a sleeper solid. So, our ancestors learned to make their own. Snow, paradoxically, became an ally. Packed densely, it acted as insulation, holding warmth inside. Dome-shaped snow huts, primitive predecessors of the Inuit igloo, could trap the heat of a single fire, raising the inside temperature far above the deadly cold outside. Building such shelters required patience. Blocks of hard-packed snow were cut with stone tools and stacked in a spiral, each layer narrowing toward the top until the dome sealed. Inside, animal hides were laid on the ground to insulate against the frozen earth, and small vents were left to let smoke escape. In open plains without snow deep enough for such construction, hunters turned to bones. The remains of mammoths, tusks, ribs, massive skulls, became the framework for hide tents. Large ribs arched overhead like the beams of a cathedral, while thick skins were draped and secured with sinew. These bone and hide shelters were sturdy, portable, and could withstand the battering of the wind. In the forested edges of the Ice Age world, wood was added to the equation. Lean-tos and log shelters, reinforced with furs, became common, providing quick refuge during hunts. Fire was the soul of these shelters. Without it, the walls were meaningless. Fires were kept smoldering day and night, guarded like treasure. To let one die was a failure that could doom the entire group. Fuel was gathered obsessively. Dry wood, animal dung, even bones were burned to keep the coals alive. The warmth and light of a fire turned a frozen cave into a sanctuary, its flicker casting moving shadows that made the stone walls seem alive. The shelter was more than just protection from the elements. It was the center of life. Inside, the group huddled close, sharing body heat under layers of fur. Food was cooked, tools were crafted, wounds were tended. Here, bonds deepened. Elders taught the young, mothers nursed their children, and hunters planned the next day's journey. In the howling dark outside, predators prowled and storms raged. But within those walls, be they snow, bone, or stone, there was warmth, light, and the fragile promise of tomorrow. And in that fragile promise lay the heart of Ice Age survival. For in mastering the creation of shelter, early hominids didn't just survive the cold, they claimed a piece of the frozen world as their own. In the Ice Age, fire was not merely a convenience, it was life itself. Without it, the cold was an executioner, and the long nights were a gauntlet of unseen predators. For early hominids, mastering fire was not just about lighting it, but keeping it alive, nurturing it like a living creature. Fire-making itself was a slow art. In those days, there were no matches, no lighters, and no quick solutions. Sparks were coaxed from the collision of flint and iron pyrite, or from the slow friction of a pointed stick spinning in a carved wooden base. The work was exhausting, the failure rate high. So, once fire was born, it was rarely allowed to die. Fires were fed constantly, even during the day, and when groups moved, glowing embers were carried wrapped in dried moss or inside hollowed-out animal horns to keep them alive during travel. This role, the keeper of the fire, was one of the most sacred duties in the tribe. Often it was entrusted to the elder who could no longer hunt, or to a young member learning responsibility. They would sit close to the flames through the night, feeding it in measured intervals, shielding it from the wind with their own bodies if necessary. Fire did more than warm the body. It transformed life itself. It hardened wooden spear tips, making them deadlier in the hunt. It cooked meat, breaking down tough fibers, killing parasites, and unlocking more calories from each bite. Fuel desperately needed in the brutal cold. The smell of smoke seeped into hides and hair, driving away biting insects in warmer seasons. Firelight extended the day, allowing work to continue after sunset. Tools could be shaped, furs stitched, and stories told. And stories whispered. In the flickering glow were more than entertainment. They were the memory of the tribe, passing down knowledge of where the rivers froze last winter, where the mammoth herds roamed, and which valleys were death traps in a snowstorm. Fire was also a shield. The glow kept predators at bay. Saber-toothed cats, giant wolves, and cave bears hesitated to cross into that circle of light. Even so, guards remained on watch, spears in hand, for hunger could drive any beast to take the risk. In storms, fire gave hope. In famine, it gave the courage to endure another night. But the bond between early humans and fire was fragile. A sudden gust could scatter embers into snow. Rain could drown the flames. If the fire went out far from home, and no coals remained to rekindle it, desperation would follow. Entire hunting. Parties would halt to scrape flint and pyrite for hours, praying for sparks, while frost crept into their bones. The keeper of the fire, therefore, was not simply maintaining heat. They were guarding the heartbeat of the tribe. Without fire, the cold would claim them, the dark would surround them, and the Ice Age would win. But as long as the flames burned, humanity burned with them. It was in this constant battle to keep fire alive that our ancestors learned something profound. Survival was not just about enduring the world, but about bending it, turning a wild, dangerous force into an ally. And in doing so, they lit the first true torch on the long road to civilization. The Ice Age did not end in a single thaw. It retreated in pulses, each one slow, each one leaving behind its mark on the land and on the people who had endured it. For the early hominids who had survived its most unforgiving centuries, the skills they had forged were not just responses to hardship. They were seeds planted deep into the human lineage, shaping everything that came after. The knowledge of hunting vast beasts with coordinated teamwork would evolve into the strategies of future hunters, warriors, and explorers. The patience to track prey across miles of frozen tundra became the patience to build civilizations brick by brick. The practice of making tools from stone, bone, and wood laid the groundwork for agriculture's sickles, for the chisels of stonemasons, for the weapons of kings. The Ice Age had been the greatest of teachers, and it taught not with gentle lessons, but with merciless tests. Those who could not adapt vanished, leaving only faint traces in the soil. Those who did survive emerged stronger, more cunning, and more united. The bonds formed around the fire, the instinct to care for the young and the wounded, the deep understanding that survival was a collective endeavor, and these became the foundations of society. Even the way we tell stories today, gathered in living rooms, around campfires, or on glowing screens, echoes those nights when survival itself was wrapped in the warmth of shared words. When the great ice sheets began to shrink and forests crept north again, humans followed the retreating cold, bringing with them fire, tools, and memory. They spread across continents, crossing land bridges, sailing on primitive rafts, and stepping into entirely new worlds. They carried with them the genetic and cultural imprints of the Ice Age. Endurance in the face of scarcity, creativity, born from necessity and a respect for the balance between humanity and the wild, yet the Ice Age was never truly gone. In the DNA of every human, the story of that time remains etched, the way our bodies store fat, the way our minds respond to danger, the way our communities instinctively protect their own. Every modern achievement, from cities to space travel, traces its roots to those first sparks struck in the darkness, to the shelters dug into snowdrifts, to the hunts that fed the clan for a season. In the end, the Ice Age was not just a chapter in human history. It was the crucible in which humanity itself was forged. It was the era when the fragile spark of our species could have been snuffed out at any moment, yet burned on, a stubborn ember carried across frozen plains, guarded by hands that refused to let it die. And when the ice finally released its grip on the earth, it left behind a creature unlike any that had walked the planet before, a being not only able to survive the cold, but to imagine, to dream, to plan for futures unseen. The legacy of those early hominids is not simply that they lived. It is that they endured with purpose. They stood against an age that could have erased them, and in doing so, they lit the first path toward everything we are today. The cold shaped them, but it did not break them. And so, in the quiet depths of winter, when frost paints the world white and wind rattles the windows, we are hearing an ancient echo, the voice of the Ice Age whispering that we have been here before, and we have survived.